Well, hello to all you retro gaming fans out there, and welcome to another installment of Take It or Leave It. I love video games, and showing my appreciation for the genre, I have been expressing my love for platformers by taking a look at these three games already. But for as much as I do enjoy a simple platformer from time to time, I also really like playing with other genres. So what better way to explore that than talking about one of my favorite genres in gaming, survival horrors.
And I'd say the most appropriate way to start out with talking about this specific genre is the very game to first use that definition. Oh yeah, I'm talking about the original Resident Evil.
To start, the story about this particular game's development is pretty fascinating. The story begins with an exclusive Famicom game known as Sweet Home, along with a man who worked in Capcom, Takeru Fujiwara. Sweet Home was released in 1989 and was pretty well received. In fact, it was considered better than the movie it was based on. You definitely don't see that kind of reputation every day, but what the critics really liked was how revolutionary it was for horror games. By the time 1993 rolled around, Fujiwara wanted to remake Sweet Home, and then in 1994, the original PlayStation hit the gaming scene. But unfortunately, by this time, Capcom ended up losing the rights for Sweet Home. But instead of dropping this new game idea, Fujiwara decided to have this game as its own thing, and for this new horror game, he ended up hiring a man known as Shinji Mikami, who, fun fact, is responsible for designing Goof Troop for the SNES.
You didn't mishear shit. This guy really did go from designing a Disney game to an all-out horror game.
But there was a reason for this. See, Mikami was known for being a complete and utter scaredy cat. So when directing, Mikami can just tell the team what scared him and what did not scare him.
This is one of the most clever ideas for developing a horror game, nay, a game in general I've seen. This idea should honestly become more utilized in horror game development, because getting someone else's perspective on how scary a game is could really be good to help developers make tension, atmosphere, and well-executed scares. Note to self, developers can really learn something from this story.
So after scares, and scares, Biohazard was finally released in Japan on March 22nd in 1996. Yeah, the game was originally called Biohazard and continues to be called that name in Japan to this day. It is kinda unknown why it is not called that in the West. I am aware that people say that it's because of another game called Biohazard as well, but I wasn't really able to find anything. So the name ended up being Resident Evil in the West, and I'm not gonna lie for a second that name simply makes a lot more sense. At least for some of the games, that is. I mean, in the first game, you are fighting an evil in a residence, and that makes more sense than calling it Biohazard. Although, I guess you can argue that the enemies are biological hazards, but all in all, Resident Evil is more fitting.
But if you think I'm stopping there, then you must be new to this franchise.
This game ended up selling 5 million copies worldwide, and some of those copies are different versions. This game has 5 different releases, not including the remake because that one's worthy of its own Take It or Leave It episode. For this video, guess what version I chose? None of them.
Let me explain. I still played this game for the video, but opted to go with a more fan-made version of the game. Kinda. Still the same game, don't worry, just slightly modified.
Resident Evil ended up being re-released on the DS, Sega Saturn, and PS1. Twice. I didn't play the Saturn one because I wanted to get a more pure experience, I guess you can say, and as for the DS, sure, it does have a lot of great features, but it looks and sounds worse. So I skipped it. But the director's cut version is a completely different story. Capcom wanted to release Resident Evil with a colorized, uncensored version of the intro, along with a new soundtrack and difficulty settings. But while it did come with a new soundtrack and new difficulty settings, they ended up forgetting to make the intro colorized and uncensored, at least for the Western players.
But oh my god, going back to that new soundtrack, have you heard some of these tracks? Okay, more accurately, have you listened to one of them?
so I concluded with taking a look at the fan-made Director's Cut True version of the first Resident Evil. Like I said, it's still the same game, just with the uncensored intro and difficulty settings, which will be brought up again, and I also went with the version that has the original soundtrack. So yay! I don't have to listen to...
Now that we are finally done with Resident Evil's backstory, we can finally move on to talking about the actual game that they made. So join me as we take a look at Capcom's Resident Evil.
So, let's begin this review with the story. In 1998, in a place called Raccoon City, there were strange reports of families being attacked in the mountains nearby called the Arklay Mountains. Not only were people getting attacked, some were eaten alive. There were apparent sightings of monsters in the mountains resembling dogs. So, the Raccoon City Police Department sends SARS Bravo team to go investigate, only for them to lose contact with them, and so then send STAR's Alpha team to go look for Bravo team, and maybe even find out what's going on in the mountains in the process. They did manage to find their helicopter, but no one was in it, and all the equipment was still there. Just when they saw this, one of their team members, Joseph, ended up getting mauled to death by a pack of zombie dogs. That's not all though. Their helicopter pilot, Brad, just straight up abandons them in the forest, leaving them no choice but to run to the nearest sanctuary to them, which happens to be a weird mansion. There are two different story continuations you can choose from. You can play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. If you choose Jill, you get a story where she and Barry Burton try to make their escape out of the mansion. If you choose Chris, you get a story where Chris finds a member of Bravo team, Rebecca Chambers, and also tries to make their escape.
This story, concept-wise, is a decently effective way to try and invest the player in wanting to know answers. As for the ending portion of the story, I will discuss it at the end of this video.
I would like to start out by saying that the version that I am showing is the uncensored colorized version, but in the original version of the game, it was in black and white, and for some reason the only live action cutscene that was in black and white. Every other cutscene in live action is in color. Honestly though, I actually kind of like how the black and white looks. Don't get me wrong, it is harder to tell what they're being chased by thanks to the editing, whereas in the uncensored cut, they do show that they are being chased by zombie dogs, and the fact that it didn't match with any of the other cutscenes with everything else being in color. But I feel like the black and white gave the opening cutscene a nice B-movie feel to it. And come on, who doesn't like a good B-movie every once in a while?
Speaking of B-movies though, I'm pretty sure you know what I'm going to talk about next. The voice acting.
Oh yeah, probably the most infamous part of RE1 on the OG PlayStation is definitely the voice acting. Everyone knows how bad the voice acting is, and that is kind of a shame since the story did have proper potential to be interesting.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But without a shadow of a doubt, the most infamous character victim to this is Barry fucking Burton. We all know about Master of Unlocking and Jill Sandwich.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the Master of Unlocking, take it with you. That was too close. You were almost a Jill Sandwich.
But wanna know what my favorite scene is? No, it's not Master of Unlocking or Jill Sandwich, although that second one in particular is still very funny. It's actually a scene near the end of the game. Enjoy.
Do you think we could see Tyrant now?
Barry, you're so optimistic.
That goes to show that this script was written by someone who didn't really know everything about the English language. By the way, how would you react if you got pepper sprayed out of nowhere? Well, this is how Chris reacts.
Whoa! What is it?
What? Oh,
Oh no! Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
You must be from the Bravo team.
And this is how any sane person would react.
Oh, my fucking eyes! What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy bitch? Also, why the fuck does Rebecca talk like Dora the Explorer?
Yes, sir. I'll do my best. I have to prepare something.
Hola! Soy Rebecca! And I'm Chris. Have you ever been ambushed by zombies? I have. Me too! So yeah, the voice acting is obviously pretty terrible, but it's also really entertaining.
Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
Resident Evil does not play like any other game that I've reviewed so far. This game operates on tank controls. What are they? Well, this is how they work. Press up on the D-pad, the character moves forward. Left turns the character left, right turns the character right, and down equals Michael Jackson. This might sound simple, but the thing is, it doesn't matter where the camera is pointing, the directions are always the same. I see a lot of 50-50 debates on this control style. Some say it holds up, and some say they're terrible. Me?
Well, I don't know how some people are going to react, but I just don't really see why these controls are seen as bad. Let me explain.
Can these controls be disorientating at first? Yes. But the thing is, after playing this for I'd say 30 minutes or so, you eventually do get used to it. And I'd say that this kind of game works best with tank controls anyway, and that's all because of the fixed camera angles. It doesn't matter what direction the camera is facing, you'll always be going forward, while holding forward without needing to constantly flip your directions. It works well. As for combat, the game isn't heavily focused on it, but you still get a nice variety of weapons to help you. Except for the knife. Aside from the webs in the basement, just do not use this. It's clunky as hell. You start out with a typical handgun, but then you'll be able to get a shotgun, a bazooka if you're playing as Jill, a Colt Python, and a flamethrower if you're playing as Chris. Oh yeah, and a rocket launcher at the very end. For taking care of zombies, I recommend just using the shotgun. Headshots are crazy easy to do, the hitbox is massively generous. With Jill's bazooka, I recommend using on hunters and specifically acid rounds. You do have multiple different rounds for the bazooka though. Acid, flame, and crusher, which can all be used in different situations. The Magnum is a fantastic gun that can do headshots on zombies without even thinking about it, but I recommend saving the ammo for the end. Finally, Chris's flamethrower. It doesn't get too much attention, you only use it in the cave's boss battle, and that's it. All these weapons, minus the knife, are very fun to use. The combat is as simple as holding down R1 and then pressing X. It's really that simple. For the last thing for controls and abilities, we have healing items. You can either get first aid kits or mixed herbs. Make sure you carry at least one of these items with you at all times, just in case. As for what you have, we have green, blue, and red herbs. Blue on poisons, and red can be mixed with green to give you your health back. You can also just use herbs individually, except for red, and also mix 2 or 3 green herbs together. When it comes to the overall gameplay with Resident Evil, it really is nothing like something compared to Dead Space. Not only with its combat, but with everything else. The overall gameplay is this. You explore through a spooky, zombie-infested location and look for all sorts of different items to pick up. Some items are more important than others. Some allow you to progress while others can just help you with progression, like the maps of every area, ammunition, and ink ribbons. While some of these guns definitely can be useful, the catch is, ammo is very limited. Every shot needs to be way more of a conscious decision rather than something you just do regularly. The good thing is, the further you get in the game, the less limited ammo gets, and I personally like this feeling with the difficulty. Sure, the game essentially does get easier as a result, but it always makes me feel like I am really conquering this place and coming out on top. To put it simply, it makes me feel like I really am the character that I'm playing as, starting unfamiliar, and then becoming an unstoppable badass in the end. This weirdly makes the game more immersive for me.
But just because I say that it can get easier, does not mean that it's a good idea to get cocky. And for this video, I learned that the hard way. What did I do wrong? Well, I was being a wee bit too ballsy, and I didn't save my game. Let's talk about ink ribbons.
So in the game, there are these ink ribbons you can find and then use for typewriters to save your game.
And trust me, those ink ribbons are gonna be your best friend in the world of Resident Evil. Right up there with guns.
Why? Because this is the only way you can save your game. Yep, doesn't matter how much you've progressed, if you do not save your progress and die, you have to start all over again from your last time you've saved your game. And to add more insult to injury, these items are very much limited and extremely important for dangerous situations. You can't save too little in case of you losing your progress, and you can't save too much because you're gonna end up running out. The way I always do it is to save before and after every major segment. Take Yawn for example. I always leave him as the last thing I conquer on my first visit in the mansion, and I save right before fighting him. After I defeat him, I save once again. But where would you usually even find typewriters? Well, in the iconic as hell safe rooms, of course. There's not just a typewriter either. See, you have limited inventory space, and there's tons of items to collect. So to work around that, they create these chests. They're in every safe room in the game, and are also universal. Universal fucking Studios. Meaning that the items you drop in the chest are always gonna reappear in every chest, not the one you dropped them in. Which was the right choice.
But you don't just survive in the spooky mansion. You also need to find items in order to get you further in the adventure.
Keys are the most obvious collectibles. You use them for locked doors, I mean, who could have really guessed that, in order to find more items, or just health, ammo, or ink ribbons. There's really nothing much else other than there are multiple different keys for the mansion named after night equipment, stuff, clothes, but yeah, nothing else to say. They speak for themselves. The more interesting topic are the puzzles. There are a decent number of them, and are pretty memorable and fun, and even creative at times. There's one with playing Moonlight Sonata on a piano and unlocking a secret room, one for pushing night statues on top of poison gas vents, and my favorite one is the one where you mix different chemicals together to form the V-Jolt. Sure, they are easy, but also pretty memorable too, and while keys are typically used for progression, the real progression tools are the 5 crests and the 3 MO discs. The crests are used for getting out of the mansion, and the MO discs, though not required, let you free either Chris or Jill from the jail cells. Lastly, you have the files you find and read. I really like these. They make this world feel more alive, and I also really like the one where you're reading about the reports of the happenings in the Arclay Mountains. It's like we're actually seeing the events happening through the public's perspective. But by far the most effective file you find in the game is the one you find in the bedroom right after you kill a zombie coming out of the closet. And no, that's not him coming out as gay, I suppose. No, instead you read a journal left behind by one of the scientists. He talks about having to feed the dogs, the fact that no employee is allowed to leave the mansion, and him needing to wear a weird suit. Throughout the journal, he describes himself feeling itchy and not being able to sleep properly, and the fact that a piece of rotten flesh dropped off his arm. The rest of it has him turning into a mindless zombie, killing one of the employees, and not being able to write sentences anymore. Could the zombie from the closet you just killed be that guy? Well, it might be. Out of all of the parts in this game that try to be scary, this one is easily the one that holds up the most, and is the only part in this game that to this day still is quite chilling to read. These files do a great job with giving you info on what happened in this mansion before you came here.
Lastly, I want to talk about the 2 different characters you play as. Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. Not only do they have story differences, but also gameplay differences.
I'm just gonna straight up cut the bullshit here. Jill is the better character to play as by far. Why? Well, these are the reasons. Advantage 1. Lockpick. Jill gets a lockpick from Barry. This allows her to access way more doors than Chris, and even allows her to skip getting a key. With Chris, on the other hand, with drawers and even doors, he needs to get small keys that don't even stack up on top of each other. Not to mention that there's a whole section that Chris can't access because he needs the sword key. Advantage 2. Early shotgun. There's a room in the game that the shotgun is held in. If you pick it up and exit the room, the ceiling to the small room leading to the shotgun starts to come down, and if you're playing as Jill, Barry ends up saving you, allowing you to get the shotgun crazy early into the adventure. However, if you're playing as Chris, you just die. Instead, you need to go to another room and grab a broken shotgun to replace the spot of the real shotgun, Raiders of the Lost Ark style. So you end up getting the shotgun not as early and having to deal with the handgun for a little longer. Advantage 3. Bazooka. Like I said, Jill has access to the bazooka, which works wonders against the hunters, which I'll get to in a minute, especially with acid rounds. Chris instead has to use the shotgun, which still works, but a lot better on zombies. Advantage 4. More space. Jill has 8 slots. Chris has 6. Do I really have to explain? Dealing with 8 slots is already time-consuming enough, so I think you can imagine why this is just not ideal. Advantage 5. Barry Burton.
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
The only real benefits that Chris has is being able to run faster and take more damage. That's literally it. Oh, and he has the superior reaction to when he unlocks the lab basement doors. Yeah. You do take control of Rebecca too, but only in a couple of instances, and is not as good of a rescuer as Barry. But she did give me the chance to do that chemical puzzle, so that's cool.
Overall, though, while it is definitely cool to give Jill and Chris gameplay differences, if you don't care enough about experiencing the slightly different story with slightly different character interactions...
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
then I advise just playing as Jill and don't even bother with Chris. Which is a shame and a problem too. Jill just has so many benefits over Chris that it just makes the average player not even want to bother with him. And that's not the best game design. Sure, you could argue that this is intended as a hard mode, but the thing is, Chris is always left as the default choice in the character selection screen. So tell me this, why would a developer want any new player to start out with hard mode? Just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I personally see this as an unintentional hard mode.
Despite that, though, the gameplay here is still very fucking solid, I'd say. A lot of it is very strategy-based and using your brain a tad. Doesn't require Einstein power, just regular human power. To be honest, I'm quite impressed that they managed to make this game very fun to play, even in the modern age. Last but not least, we have enemies. We got zombies, zombie dogs, birds, bees, haha, giant spiders, tiny snakes, hunters, and chimeras. The real gameplay noteworthy ones are the zombies, hunters, and chimeras. Zombies are enemies you really need to pay attention to. When you use the handgun to shoot them down, you need to wait for their blood to start pouring out, and if that doesn't happen while they're on the floor, that means that they're still alive as a zombie. Hunters are fucking brutal. They end up all over the mansion and are very dangerous and can deal a lot of damage, especially when you're playing as Chris.
Just for a moment, I'm gonna talk about the difficulty settings. And the reason why is because while I did play Jill's campaign in normal mode, I played Chris's in easy. I'm not the best at survival horror, and Chris has way too many disadvantages from Jill for me to be able to play as him properly. So just so I can actually play as him, I used easy mode. And I'm really fucking sorry. It's my fault. It's just all my fault. I suck at survival horror so bad. I'm very ashamed of that.
Lastly are the chimeras. They can climb on walls and crawl really fast. My suggestion, don't bother fucking fighting these cunts at all. Otherwise, you're gonna have a bad time. The enemies are very cool though. Sure, some are a tad bit generic, but others like the hunters and chimeras have cool designs.
Now probably the most iconic part of the original Resident Evil, the design of the Spencer Mansion.
The design of the mansion is probably where the most effort was put in, and yeah, this mansion is really well designed and very naturally easy to learn inside and out. The shortcuts, the identifiable rooms, and even some of the music choices on rare occasions. It's all here to make exploring this mansion a very pleasant experience. There's even a mission where you need to save a member of Bravo Team and get a serum for him after being bitten by a poisonous snake.
That'll always be one of my biggest pet peeves in the general media, is people not being able to tell the difference between poisonous and venomous. Venom is typically injected through the victim's blood, while poison is typically needed to be fed to the victim. See the difference? Richard, my friend, what you got bit from was a venomous snake, not a poisonous one. And serum won't do you shit. You need anti-venom.
Even though he does die when you get him the serum anyway, it is still a decent way to test the player with memorizing the mansion's layout. Can't really say the same for the other maps though. The courtyard is fine, it's a decent one. There's the cool tank room with Neptune along with my favorite puzzle in the game. As for the caves though, whoa! This is easily the worst part of the game for me. Not only does it look really fucking ugly, but everything looks the same. I have a hard time navigating around the area thanks to all the darkly lit halls that look identical to each other. Not to mention all of those hunters causing fucking mayhem in this forsaken place, and oh my fucking shitting, pissing, spitting god, that long ass animation of the walls turning while using the crank. You almost done? Oh, Jesus Christ. Last complaint, they do give you a map of the area, but by the time you finally get it, you're already up to the end of that area, so what's the point? Then we get the final map of the game, the lab, and it's pretty good. Sure, it's very small, but it has a cool atmosphere, a new version of the zombies that respawn, and a pretty cool translation puzzle. Overall, I'd say the map design of this game holds up really well, specifically the mansion, and for a first attempt, that's really impressive. The boss fights in this game are just okay. None of them are really all that stand out gameplay-wise from each other, which is a shame, but at least their designs are pretty cool. We have Yawn the giant venomous snake, Black Tiger the giant spider,
That rhymed.
Neptune the shark, Plant 42, and Tyrant. All of these guys, except for Neptune, work the same way. Point, shoot, heal yourself every once in a while, done. Neptune is goddamn pathetic as well. All he is a shark that tries to chase me, but the moment the cutscene triggers, I'm already in the room draining the water. So yeah, not very exciting boss fights gameplay-wise, but again, they at least have cool designs, especially Tyrant. Moving on to graphics, Resident Evil has a very distinct presentation. Aside from the character models and items, every single background is pre-rendered, meaning that each camera angle was a screenshot of a 3D room and used as a 2D asset. I really like this method. Sure, you can argue that it's a dated part of the game, but I think it can also do a great job with showing the power of the original PlayStation. Not only can it have real-time 3D, but it can also be able to have high-quality pre-rendered images, and in RE1 it actually blends in pretty nicely with the character models.
However, despite how much I really like this method, it isn't visually perfect. At least in RE1's case.
While the images do blend in with the rest of the real-time 3D models decently, as for the backgrounds themselves, it has definitely shown its age. I don't think that this game looks bad at all, but a lot of the rooms just look a little too empty. Sure, there are some rooms that do look like proper bedrooms with an appropriate amount of furniture, and the dining room and hallways also having pretty good lighting, but there are too many rooms in this game that don't look properly lived in. Not to mention how clean the lighting can look in this mansion at times. I mean, look at the main entrance. This room has better lighting than my bedroom. If this is a mansion from the 1960s, then why does it look so clean and like it was built 2 years ago? But I'll just stop there because I understand that trying to critique very old 3D environments is a little bit unfair, especially for games. Again, I would still say that this game looks decent for its time, and each room is completely identifiable, but the rough sides do show nowadays. Especially with those pre-rendered CG cutscenes that do show a little bit of ghosting. Next is the soundtrack, and it was composed by Masami Ueda, Makoto Tomozawa, and Akira Keita. I'm very sorry with my Japanese pronunciation. Yeah, I couldn't find an individual main composer, so these three altogether will have to do.
I know what you're thinking, though. What about Mamoru Samurogachi? Nailed it. Well, after a little bit of research, I found out that he wasn't responsible for the original version of the soundtrack. He's instead responsible for the DualShock version, and... call me crazy, but I don't think his performance was as good. The guy definitely does have a very interesting history that I would talk about, but he didn't compose the original version of the soundtrack. So what I will say is, go on YouTube and look for a video on him. This isn't a history channel.
As for the actual original version of the OST, it's pretty good. I wouldn't list it as one of my favorites, hell, not even on the PS1, but each track is very memorable and has a nice atmosphere to them. We all know about the safe room theme. But some of the others are quite good. Have a listen. So yeah, good old 7 out of 10 soundtrack right here.
So now that I've talked about this whole game, it is finally time for me to talk about the rest of the story. Let's do this, bitch.
So while searching around the mansion, we've been getting some weird rumors about a traitor in stars, Barry in particular looking mighty suspicious. After powering on the elevator in the underground lab, that's when answers happen. Albert Wesker was behind this the whole time. The pharmaceutical company Umbrella ordered him to lure the STARS members into the mansion to have them killed for experimenting reasons, and Barry was also forced to lend Wesker a hand. If Barry refused, supposedly his family would end up getting harmed. That's not all. The final boss, Tyrant, was the ultimate experiment and the ultimate life form. After he explains this, Wesker gets exactly what's coming to him. At least that's what happens for Jill's. Chris's pans out slightly differently, with Rebecca getting shot, but she ends up living thanks to her bulletproof vest, so yeah. After taking care of Tyrant in the lab, the self-destruct system gets activated, and then after freeing either Jill or Chris, you're ready to escape. You go up in the helipad and shoot some flares in the sky to get Brad's attention. Yeah, even though Brad abandoned the team in the forest, he was still searching around the area for the team, with you getting radio calls from him every once in a while. But just when you think you are done, you are not. Tyrant shows up one more time. Looks like you have no choice but to take this asshole down. This is where you also get the rocket launcher to finish him off, which I'm not gonna lie, is a pretty cool way to defeat a final boss. Then a cutscene plays with the mansion completely blowing up into smithereens. The cool thing about this though, is the fact that the ending I described to you was just the ending I got. There are tons of different ways to end this game with Chris and Jill. You can have yourself as the only survivor, not blow up the mansion, or maybe even have both, and more. This is a great way to add in replay value. Going out of your way to see all of the endings is pretty damn cool. I would show you me getting these endings, but the 2 initial playthroughs I'd say were enough for me. Anyway, that has to do it with my thoughts and feelings on the original Resident Evil on the PlayStation, and this game is honestly quite impressive for its time. Sure, the voice acting is not aged well in the slightest. Some of the pre-rendered backgrounds do show their age a tad, and the balance between benefits for Jill versus Chris is just poorly handled on a gameplay level. But the gameplay itself, to this day, is still very fucking solid. It's no surprise that this game was such a hit back in the day. With gameplay this well thought out, and the design of the mansion, it's quite justified. I would honestly say that for first game in the series standards, it holds up better than other early PS1 games like the original Crash 1. On the scale of quality, I'm giving Resident Evil a 7 out of 10. Take it.
So that has to do it with the video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk about Resident Evil on the channel again one day. And I cannot wait to talk about the next game I plan to review. This was Max Rabbit you just watched. See you on the other side.